Let me first start by thanking everybody for coming. We appreciate your interest in our voter outreach. And so for the next about an hour, what we are going to do is provide a presentation on the issues. There will be an opportunity for questions, but as we get started, just want to let everybody know we are recording this so that for those that couldn't attend, they'll be able to watch it. And so for this session, appreciate it if to just let everybody know that we are recording. We do want to put this on our YouTube channel as well as Facebook, so those that couldn't attend will have an opportunity to have the same information. So just to let you know that. So for the presentations, I just want to kind of set some of the ground rules for you. What this presentation is and what it's not. Our purpose here is to provide the facts on Proposition 412, facts on Proposition 413. We also are planning on covering, or we will be covering home rule. Well, that's 412, right? Home rule is 412. And 413 is we plan on covering them in separate sections, although it's one on the ballot, and that is, of course, the CIP discussion and pavement preservation. From those, we will then move into talking about our interchanges, and we'll have a presentation. There's been a lot of interest in what's happening with the interchanges, and so it made sense that if we were going to take this time and talk to the public, that we would talk about what's happening with the interchanges, because there is so much interest in that. So we will be providing facts on all of those issues. So with those covered, I would like to just talk. We've had a couple of booths. I don't know how many of you have had an opportunity to see. We had a booth at Andy Divine Days, and then we were at First Friday, and there's been a number of people that stop by and ask questions about property tax. And so just really quickly, we don't really have a presentation on it, but while we were doing this, thought it would be a good opportunity just to remind everybody that the city does not charge a property tax. There's been a lot of confusion about that. And so just so everybody knows, you pay property tax when you live in the city of Kingman, but none of that property tax comes to the city. So just want to make sure that everybody's clear on that. And with that, our presenters tonight will be, of course, our finance director, Tina Moline, will be covering the home rule issue and CIP issue, and then we'll turn the time then from Tina to Rob Owen, who is our public works director, and he will cover the pavement preservation section of the presentation, and then wrapping things up with the interchanges will be our city engineer, Greg Henry. So with that, we will turn the time over to Tina.
I am going to be covering Proposition 412, which we refer to as the home rule option. So we'll start with what the home rule option is. In 1980, Arizona voters approved of a state-imposed spending limit on local governments. Now that spending limit is based on a city's 1980 budget. That budget is adjusted every year by population factor for the city and by inflation factors. What it does not take into consideration is that a city's services and programs since 1980 may have increased. There may be more services and more programs that are provided to the city residents, as well as some of those programs, such as our water, sewer, and sanitation services, are provided to citizens outside of the city limits, so county residents. And so those residents are not included in that population factor adjustment. So because of this, the state constitution said, you know what, cities? You can go ahead and adopt an alternative to that state-imposed spending limit. And for us, that is the home rule option. And the home rule option excludes certain expenditures from that state-imposed limitation. So since the city of Kingman has water, sewer, and sanitation services, and those services are offered or provided to citizens outside of city limits, we exclude those expenditures from the state-imposed limitation. So who approves the home rule option? Well, you, as the City of Kingman registered voters, you approve that. And you have approved that since 1988. The home rule option is good for 4 years, so it goes back out to the voters every 4 years. The last time it was approved by the voters was in November of 2014, meaning it's coming on the ballot, or it will be on the ballot this year, November of 2018. So there are currently 91 cities and towns in the state of Arizona. And all of them have a state-imposed limitation. 79 of them had adopted some sort of alternative to the state-imposed expenditure limitation. Of those 79, 51 use or fall under the home rule option. So one of the questions that we get is, well, since you're asking us to allow you to spend more than this state allows you to spend, well, then you must be increasing my taxes. And that is not the case. Home rule option has absolutely nothing to do with our tax rates. It strictly allows us to spend the revenues that we are already collecting. It allows us to spend them on operational needs, on capital needs, in order to provide the services for you as our residents. So we've talked about the state-imposed spending limitation. Well, what is that dollar amount? We know that we can't exceed it. The state has said, well, in 1980, the city had about a $4.4 million budget. 38 years later, after it's been adjusted for population and inflation factors, it's now $45 million is what it says we are allowed to spend. Well, our fiscal year 19 budget is just over $120 million. Now, what the state also says is, you know what, city, you guys get money for grants, you get money from the county for flood control, and a few other things like that. We're not going to make you count that money towards that state-imposed limitation. So when we take all of those expenditures that the state says you don't have to include, that leaves us with about $85 million that is subject to that $45 million state-imposed limitation. So if we didn't have home rule, there's a $40 million difference for fiscal year 19. So what happens if home rule is not approved in November? Well, as I stated earlier, if we use the fiscal year 19 budget figures, there's a difference of $40 million. There has to be cuts, significant cuts across the board. Water, sewer, sanitation, airport services, parks, recreation, police, fire, streets. All of those departments fall under that $85 million. So $40 million would have had to be cut. Additionally, if it's not approved, the home rule option cannot go back out to the voters until November of 2020. So we're required to wait 2 years before we can take that back out to the voters. So what does the calculation look like? So I've talked about the numbers, and some of us would rather visually see those numbers. So in fiscal year 19, we have that $120.8 million budget, are our total expenses. We have our exclusions of the constitutional exclusions, so those exclusions that the state says you don't have to count. That's $35 million. Because we can take out those home rule exclusions of just over $40 million, the amount that is subject to the state-imposed limitation is $44.6 million, and the state-imposed limitation is $45 million. So we're okay for fiscal year 19. If you look at fiscal year 20, which those are all based on estimates, we do not know where we're going to be in fiscal year 20, you'll see that with home rule, we should be okay. Without home rule, we may have a deficit of about $24 million that we'll need to cut. So how will the question read on the ballot? It basically says, the title of it is basically saying that you are approving or that it's allowing the exclusions of water, sewer, sanitation, and airport services from being included in the state-imposed expenditure limitation. So a yes vote shall have the effect of allowing expenditures of the water, sewer, sanitation, and airport services to be excluded from the state expenditure limitation. A no vote shall have the effect of retaining the state-imposed expenditure limitations regardless of the availability of funds. So that is the information on, I think we're going to take questions afterwards, ma'am. Proposition 413. So it is titled the Responsible Sales and Use Tax Act. So Proposition 413 has three different components to it. There is a 0.5% increase to our sales and use tax for capital projects. There's a 0.5% increase in our sales and use tax for pavement preservation. And there is also a component that takes the voting power away from the City Council and pushes it out to our voters. So what is the purpose of the 1% sales and use tax increase? So the City Council approved a 1% increase in August 15th of 2017, of which a 0.5% is dedicated to pavement preservation and the other 0.5% is dedicated to capital projects. The additional revenues that the city is expected to collect in fiscal year 19 from that 1% increase will be about $6.4 million. So $3.2 million for pavement preservation and $3.2 million for capital projects. So why the 0.5% increase for capital projects? Well, the City of Kingman puts together a 5-year capital improvement plan every single year. And those projects that are included in that plan are comprised of all sorts of different types of projects. There are water projects, wastewater projects, sanitation, flood control, and all of those types of projects have their own dedicated revenue stream. Then we have parks and recreation, public safety, streets, and then just building and facilities improvements. Those projects have one dedicated revenue stream that they all share. Now, over the last 10 years, those general capital projects, so public safety, parks and recreation type projects, have ranged anywhere from $138 million to just over $200 million for one dedicated revenue source of 2% in room tax that generates about $600,000 a year. So many of those general capital projects end up going unfunded. Things such as Eastern Street improvements, Stockton Hill Road, the widening of Stockton Hill Road. There's improvements at the parks, so restrooms, lighting, parking at the parks that go unfunded. We've got, radio consoles and station alerting for public safety. Those types of projects also go unfunded. So the funded and unfunded projects over the last 10 years, that $138 million to $200 million that I just alluded to in the previous slide, this is the history of those. And you'll see two different color bars in each of those years. The dark color, that top bar, are our water, wastewater, flood control, and sanitation projects. Again, a dedicated revenue stream for each of those. The larger part of each of those bars, that lighter color, are our general capital projects. So you'll see from year to year how many general capital projects that we have in our 5-year CIP. And of course, we can't fund all of those. And so this year, in fiscal year 19, $138 million in our general capital projects. So that's the history of the 10 years in capital projects. Let's look at this year's 5-year capital improvement plan, our funded and our unfunded projects. So the first 4 categories, facilities and systems, streets, parks and recreation, public safety, those are our general capital projects. We have $138 million for the next 5 years in general capital projects. Of that $138 million, you're going to see $114 million is streets, $10 million is parks and recreation, public safety, $11 million. When we look at those street projects, which are most of those general capital projects, what types of projects are we talking about? Well, we're talking about projects like Eastern Street Improvements. It's a $10.5 million project. We're talking about a project like Stockton Hill Road, the widening of it. Over $4 million. We're talking about Southern Avenue widening, almost $4 million. And then, of course, Rancho Santa Fe Parkway TI Phase 1, just over $40 million. Those are some of the projects that are in those general capital projects that we're talking about. So, you know what our 5-year CIP looks like. What about this year? Just fiscal year 19, the funded capital projects. So what are we funding this year? So the red bars, again, are general capital projects. Those are the projects that we are able to fund. It's just over $10.1 million this year in general capital projects, and you'll see how it's laid out by type. So facilities and systems, streets, $3.5 million, parks and recreation, just over $600,000, and public safety, $5.3 million. So how has the 1% increase that's dedicated to capital projects and pavement preservation helped? Well, that table shows some of the projects that we're able to fund this year. So we've got playground equipment. We're upgrading some of the equipment in the playgrounds and replacing some of them. Fire engine replacement. We're able to do a fire engine replacement program. Fire Station 2, we're able to fund that project. We're doing some upgrades to our police building, to this particular building. Eastern Street improvements. Granted, we can't fund the whole $10.5 million, but we've dedicated $450,000 to some right-of-way acquisition. And then just over $2 million for our I-11 East Kingman Connection project. So that is how that it is helped because instead of saying we have no money for pavement preservation, we have nothing dedicated for our streets for pavement preservation, we have very little dedicated for capital projects. Now that we have 2 dedicated revenue streams for each of those, we're able to use that $600,000 in room tax for general capital projects, and we're able to take some of the money out of the general fund, construction sales tax, and dedicate it to some of those other general capital projects. And so you'll see the pie chart on the side shows the different types of revenue sources, and that TPT right here, this is a new funding source right there, $3.3 million. This is a chart of our unfunded projects, and there are some handouts on one of the tables in the back. I'm not going to go through all of them, but for the next 5 years, our unfunded projects are still at almost $3 million, and that's just our general capital projects, unfunded projects. So with that, I am going to hand it over to Mr. Rob Owen, our Public Works Director.
I'm here to talk to you a little bit about pavement preservation program. So as Tina had stated, in August of 2017, Council approved an increase in the sales tax, and half a percent of that was dedicated to pavement preservation. Those additional revenues from the increase will generate $3.2 million. And this, for the first time, established a dedicated funding source for pavement preservation. So this is our road network. We have approximately 434 lane miles, 4.4 million square yards. We went through and did pavement inventory. Our PCI, which is kind of a technical term for the condition of our asphalt, came in at 44. And a good system would come in around 80. So the theory behind pavement preservation is to do it early and do it cost effectively. What you spend to treat your asphalt early is much cheaper than what you will spend if you defer that maintenance. And that's kind of the situation we found ourselves in. So again, for every $1 spent in keeping a good road good precludes spending between $6 and $14 later to rebuild that one. This chart shows our historic spending levels. They averaged about $800,000 per year. And this also shows with the additional 0.5% TPT, what funding levels we would be able to achieve for pavement preservation projects. This shows our 2019, fiscal year 2019 planned projects. They're pretty evenly distributed across the city. There's an eastern project and a western project. The big items in that will be the Stockton Hill Road mill and overlay from Gordon to Airway. The first phase of that project has started with the water line replacement, and we will be following that with the pavement preservation portion of that project. So this is how the question, Proposition 413 will read on the ballot. This act shall be referred to as the Responsible Sales and Use Tax Act. This act is intended to repeal 1% increase in the city's transaction privilege, sales and use tax rates, and require any future increases to this tax to be approved by the people, and permits the City Council to submit measures proposing increases in this tax rate to the people. A yes vote shall have the effect of repealing 1% of the city's sales and use tax rates. A no vote shall have the effect of maintaining the current city sales and use tax rate.
My job here is to talk about the interchanges, the proposed interchanges on I-40, and we are talking specifically about, we have 3 proposed interchanges on the interstate. This just shows where those proposed interchanges are located. They're the ones in black. We see Stockton Hill and Andy Devine in orange. First one on the west, starting from west to east, is the I-40 US 93 West Kingman TI. This is an ADOT funded project. The general scope of this project is to construct a high-speed system connection between I-40 and US 93 to alleviate the traffic congestion and enhance regional traffic flow. If anyone's come home from Las Vegas on a weekend, they've probably been backed up by the traffic. There's just too many driveways, too many trucks, too many turning movements on that segment of road there that cause conflicts and delays. So the new interchange would bypass all that a little bit to the east and make a direct connection coming from Phoenix to 93 north. And this map shows exactly what I just mentioned there. The new alignment is essentially in blue. Yellow alignment here is just the existing Beale interchange, and the new one would come in just a bit to the east of that and make a direct connection to 93. General history for the West Kingman TI. First report I was able to find was from July of 1993 when ADOT commissioned a study called the Final Project Assessment for the West Kingman TI. They recognized there were operational issues back there. There were traffic congestion and other issues. And then in 1996, they completed a multi-modal corridor profile study, which recommended a new connection, again, based on traffic issues and delays. Then in November 1995 and June 96, some of you may have been here then, and there were some, ADOT actually held some public meetings looking for input from the public on the general alignment for what that new system connection should look like. Again, in 1999, there was another corridor profile study which further identified the need for that bypass and that freeway type traffic interchange. Then moving up ahead to 2007, 2008, ADOT had a project scoping meeting trying to define the scope of the work for design and concept for the new interchange. And they held another public meeting in March of 2008. And they completed a feasibility study in October 2009, which showed 8 possible alignments. And of those 8, based on the public comment and the input from other engineers and agencies, they were recommending 2 at that time for further recommendation. The one that I showed you on that slide was the final alignment that everyone came up with. It was essentially the easiest connection. The less if anyone is familiar with the topography, there's some mountains there that have to come around, and there's a lot of rock that has to be excavated. So the alignment that was shown, and I can certainly answer more questions as we get over in the groups, but that was the one that was chosen, and that's the general reason why. Then, Between 2011 2018, ADOT completed the scoping. They completed a design concept report. They did an interim improvement out there, adjusting the signal timing and dropping the dedicated lane to allow for traffic to what they determined would flow better. I think we all know there's still some problems out there. Last fiscal year, they had $5 million program for design and updating the design concept report. And the next steps they need to do would be to complete that updated design concept report, complete the design for the new bridges and the freeway. Their 5-year plan shows a tentative $10 million in fiscal year 2020 for right-of-way acquisition for the project. And in 2024, they are proposing $55 million for construction of the project. That's all I got on the US 93. The second interchange is the Kingman Crossing interchange. And essentially the scope of this project is to construct a new traffic interchange on Interstate 40 with arterial roads north and south to promote and facilitate commercial development, to increase public safety response times, and to promote general traffic circulation. We all know of the new schools on Prospector Street, and the city certainly gets calls from residents on the south side of I-40 complaining about, the delays. They have to use the existing Eastern Street to get there, and we just want to let you know we're aware of those issues. This would help solve some of those issues. Here's a general graphic showing the new interchange, the new connecting road. Basically, we're talking a new road from I-40 that would wind its way down to Southern Avenue and line up with Seneca Street, and then extending the existing Santa Rosa Drive over to Prospector, and Prospector up to meet the existing pavement that's out there now to provide that circulation to the schools. The schools are off the map, but they're located up here somewhere just north of Airway Avenue. Also, let me go back. Also, there would be a connection here to Louise. I said Southern, but there would be a connection as well to Louise Avenue. So the history for Kingman Crossing, this is probably our youngest proposed interchange. The other ones go back, as you'll see, several decades. In September 2006, the city hired an engineer to prepare a DCR, design concept report, federal highways, change of access report, the environmental documents, and 30% engineering design documents. That study was essentially completed in 2010. ADOT approved the change of access and at that time it was to the north side only. The city had sought access to the south side, but there was several issues from residents that were concerned about that, and so at that time the change of access approved only access to the north side. That's where the hospital is now. Design concept report was completed in June of 2010. Then in January of 2017, the council approved a contract with AECom to design Kingman Crossing Boulevard, that road that I showed that snaked down through the middle of the vacant land there. And that would connect with Southern Avenue and update the change of access report to include access to the south side of Interstate 40 as well as the north side of Interstate 40. And at this point, those plans are 90% complete. And then moving up to October of that 2017, council established the I-11 East Kingman Connection Project. That was essentially a project that proposed building both the Kingman Crossing interchange and the Rattlesnake interchange under one project. And I'll talk a little bit about as to the status of that here as I move along. Essentially, the next steps would be to complete the design of the traffic interchange and the arterial roadways, identify and secure right-of-way. At this point, the city has already identified and secured the right-of-way on the southern half, the south of I-40. We've established a plat through the city land, which identified the right-of-way, dedicated it to the public. We've secured right-of-way south of that. And at this point, we've been working with Kingman Regional Medical Center on securing the right-of-way on the north side of Interstate 40. Next step after that would be to complete the necessary develop and implement the construction funding. At this point, the city's working with KRMC on a development agreement to fund this and be reimbursed through sales tax dollars. And further, to complete necessary agreements with ADOT. In order to build the interchange for anyone, city, KRMC, to build the interchange on the interstate, there has to be agreements in place with ADOT. That brings me to the Rancho Santa Fe Parkway traffic interchange. The scope on this is pretty similar to Kingman Crossing. The main addition would be there's promote and facilitate commercial and industrial development, provide access to the airport, and to promote and make that traffic circulation better. There's just not a good connection from south of I-40 to north of I-40 at this point. Eastern Street is essentially it, and it is a bottleneck. This graphic just shows the general location of the traffic interchange. It will connect to Louise Avenue on the south. It will connect to Airway Avenue, Midway. Airway would need to be extended back to Prospector Street. And then on the northern end, it connects to the airport. The airport's not shown on this map, but it is shown on the map over there. I just didn't have room to get it on the PowerPoint here. History for Rancho Santa Fe. This is actually the oldest interchange. This was shown on a general plan back in 1971, and it was discussed again in the transportation study from November of 1980. So we're talking about 5 decades here on this one. Back in 1998, 99, the city hired a consultant. They conducted an interchange assessment. The recommendation at that time was to locate it at the present location at the Rancho Santa Fe Parkway alignment. It's been shown on the 2005 Kingman Transportation Study and all updates to that study that have been done since then as a necessary project needed for traffic and circulation. In June of 2005, ADOT was actually promoting this project. They were looking at it as a relief for traffic and trucks on Andy Devine, Route 66, from I-40 to the airport in that general area there. It's not probably as bad as Beale 93, but there's certainly a lot of traffic issues on Andy Devine, north of I-40, between I-40 and the airport there. There's the truck stop, the truck wash, trucking business, and then all the trucks that go out to the airport to do their business at the industrial park. So in that year, 2005, ADOT actually programmed $500,000 for a design concept report. The city was certainly on board. Rob and I attended a lot of those meetings back in 2005, if not all of them. And then in June of 2005, the city signed a development agreement with owners who owned the right-of-way immediately adjacent to the interchange for certain rezoning and right-of-way dedications if the interchange were to go in. There was a sunset clause in that ordinance, and that has since sunset, so that will need to be revisited as we move into some of the next project steps. February 2006, pardon me, the city signs a letter of intent with ADOT. So that letter of intent had, at that time, ADOT paying 70% of the cost of the interchange and the city paying 30% of the cost. Now, that letter of intent has essentially sunset too and will need to be revisited between the city and ADOT. October 2017, the design concept report was complete. And from there, ADOT programmed design money. I believe they programmed about 1.7, 1.8 million to complete the design. They brought it to 95% stage at that point, and then it has since sat on the shelf since then. Initially, when the project was first identified, it was known as the Rattlesnake Traffic Interchange, and I just point out here, because some people still will ask questions about the Rattlesnake Interchange. It is essentially the Rancho Santa Fe Parkway Interchange now. The council passed a resolution to change the name of the road back in 2009. ADOT back in 2009 had programmed $18 million for construction. They were working on the design. They had $18 million that they thought they were going to participate for construction. And that's about the same time there was an economic recession. And so that money trickled down to $5 million for the next 3 years, 2010, 11, and 12. And then after 2012, it fell off ADOT's 5-year plan. And then in June 2011, The 95% plans were complete. Again, they are still complete to 95%, and that's one of the steps that I'll point out that needs to be completed here. And then just the city has had this on our 5-year plan as one of those unfunded projects that Tina mentioned. So hopefully that'll change in the coming years, but it's still unfunded at this point. October last year, the council established the I-11 East Kingman Connection project. And then in June of this year, the council hired a program manager to essentially manage the I-11 East Kingman Connection project, which again involves both interchanges. At this point, there's more focus on the Rancho Parkway interchange with matrix design and a limited amount of focus on the Kingman Crossing due to the proposed development agreement. Next steps for this are complete the design of the traffic interchange and the roadways, identify and secure right-of-way, and there was some money that the council budgeted in our current fiscal year for right-of-way on Airway Avenue and Rancho Santa Fe Parkway that we're proceeding with. Update the change of access report because it was the old one that was approved, which did include access to both sides of I-40. It has since expired because after 10 years, the federal highways want to see new traffic reports and new environmental reports. So that work is in progress under our current contracts with Matrix. Develop and implement construction funding and complete the necessary agreements with ADOT. And so those are the steps for the Rancho Santa Fe Parkway. And that's the end of my presentation.